Hello, everybody. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way to say Carpe Diem. It's all about going after the things that you want in life. Something that I wanted to do this year was to rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, but this time talk about it with other people, all of you. And we've up-leveled that because I've gotten a chance to talk with people who actually work on the show or worked on the show. So before I introduce today's interview guest, just a quick housekeeping item for you. If you are brand new to the show Halt and Catch Fire and you're looking for spoiler-free episode coverage, I have recaps that are spoiler-free up until the episode that you're on, so be sure to look for those. If you want spoiler-filled information, the interviews are the place to be. So I never know what answers are going to come from what episodes, what seasons. So this podcast in particular could have some spoilers in it. So just be aware of that up front. But hopefully you all stick around because we've got a great interview coming today with Ola Maslik, who was the production designer for season 4. Welcome, Ola.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to talk with you. And, before we get into any of the more technical elements of the role that you did, first, can you tell us how you got connected with the show?
I got connected through my agent, who I think knew that they were looking for a designer for 4th season. And I just finished a long show, and I was excited about doing a period piece. And I got the script and I was like, oh, 4th season, I don't know. And then I read it and I was like, oh, totally, I want to do a 4th season of this show. And it was awesome because it was very different. It was not connected to all 3 other seasons in terms of visual elements. So that was very exciting for me as a designer. And it was just the next era, essentially 90s, which I love. I grew up in 90s, my time. It was a big challenge. And I think it was just really I had a great interview. I felt good, so I'm happy that they felt good and I got the job. And me and Chris are right now working together on the show. So I think we did something good together.
Oh, that's amazing. You said this in that answer as well, but this show had a tendency to reinvent itself every season. And not only did it normally do that, but we're also going into the 90s here where we were in the 80s for the first 3 seasons, like you mentioned. So when you're prepping for something like this, where you know that there have been 3 seasons, but that might not tell you exactly what you need to do going into the 4th season, how do you prepare for something like that?
Oh, we were lucky enough. We had a lot of outlines, so I could see where the story was going. I know, maybe not necessarily had all the script, but I talked a lot with Jeff, who I think you met already, the producer who sort of guided me in direction. He was with Chris's from the beginning, and I talked a lot with Melissa. And before I went to Atlanta, I'm from New York. I spent a lot of time in a picture library, which is a library which is in Manhattan, and it's just library full of pictures. And they catalog by year, by month, by data, but time. It's just incredible. And then you can find anything about the furniture created in a certain period, or wallpaper, or a color palette, or whatever Pantone was invented. So I spent essentially entire Christmas. I got hired, I think, right before holidays. And entire holidays, I was just out of curiosity. I wanted to be prepared, and I came with a huge research just as a start, because I knew I inherited a crew which already worked on that show for 3 years. But I wanted to be respectful of what's been through and what's they brought up into the show. And so I brought the research and sat down with the decorator who was there from the beginning, and I was like, let's see what we can do different, because it's 90s, and 90s is very, very different than 80s. And we had a lot of fun, but the research is a key. Research and trying to find much deeper layer of research. The first research is sort of very easy we all know 90s, we can read about this, but just start going, name by name, and like sort of like really digging into it and trying to find that unique pieces and unique elements. So it was really fun. So this is sort of like the best way to jump into any show, but for that show it was even more specific.
Yes. You know, you inherited a team that had been on the
Mhm.
show. For you, what do you do to integrate when you're coming in and everybody else has been there already?
And they have a relationship, and they really became a friends over the years they were there. It was a local Atlanta crew, so we also knew each other from, like, outside of work, like we know in New York crew. I don't know, they were very welcoming, and I think they knew that it's a sort of a new person is coming, and we did spend a lot of time together. I had enough prep that we could know each other and not just dive into designing. I also, knowing that Lance, who is a decorator, that he helped create it for the first 3 seasons, and they were so beautiful and so successful that I would want to use his wisdom and knowledge and understanding of the show and understanding how the show goes and what's important for both Chris's and AMC and producers. So that was sort of like, sometimes you write for right person for a job, I guess, because we all did get along and we all became very, very close friends. I still stay in touch with a lot of people from that show,
Yeah.
truly a lot. And this was, I think, my first show where I also didn't know anyone before. Like I usually know, like prior I knew producer. If I didn't know producer, I could hire my decorator who I know, like someone to be just sort of under, like have a shorthand. This was the first show away from home, and we were a brand new crew and a crew who've been together for so long. So I that's why I also felt like I think I need to come prepare, so they know I'm taking this, even though it's the last season, I'm taking this very seriously.
Yeah, what a challenge. Let's reset this a bit for people. For those of us who aren't familiar with the role of a production
Mhm.
designer, what tasks would you have for a full season?
Task, it's starting with concept design for a show, for like a full color palette, which direction we would like to go, and sort of talking very closely with writers and producers and directors, and trying to find this just the language of the show. And then and the next step is that we start looking for locations, which is actually existing spaces could be used as spaces for our characters, and depends how strong or how much presence the character has on the screen, then how much we are willing to go for, and how much maybe this is just a background, so maybe we can have a little bit of less sort of no, maybe not attention, because we want to put as much attention on everything, but clearly it's impossible, like that's how it is. So when we start working with locations, then while choosing locations, and in this case was 90s, that I was working with Lance, which is decorator, is a person who is in charge of decorating sets, which is goes from wallpapers to every single furniture to it's sort of and works very closely with production designer. We are trying to narrow down and sort of and master our color palette for the season, and then divide colors between characters. So it's a very creative job, especially at the beginning, because it's all about trying to find the right language to tell the story, to help script true colors to tell the story, which I think is just incredible.
So you worked very closely with Lance for set decoration. Are there
Yes,
other roles or people or departments that you would work with very closely in the work that you did?
absolutely. So the sort of the next right or left hand person is our director, who who helps navigate and manage all the desires we have, and also help me and everyone else under us to stay on budget, to fit in budget, and make sure that the ideas we have, they're achievable in a time manner. And that position also, that person also is responsible for hire all the assistants or directors who do all the drafting, graphic designers who produce all the graphics, and it works very closely with me with prop masters. So it's almost like a person who helps to communicate with doing all the departments who are all under our umbrella of our department, which is more than just me or more than just even my department, right? It's like so many people. So it's a very collective and collaborative medium. And I think that's what's the fun part is about. That every time we have a new group of people and we have to make it work.
Well, and then every episode has a different director. So,
Yes.
I mean, there might have been repetition somewhere in there, but for the most part, you're working with a different person in that role each time. So what kind of things would you do to establish like a working relationship with a new director when they came in?
We usually had, I personally create packages for when we have already established a look of the show and sets are built or the sets are designed. We establish a lookbook, and that lookbook is shared a little bit in advance with directors so they can get familiar with the ground plans and color palette and which director style. And then when we arrive, we sort of walk them through all the sets and look at the scripts, what's we still missing, and we start looking for locations which fits their very specific episode. And sometimes we I think I had two directors who started at the beginning and then maybe came in the end, but mostly you shoot one episode and then you prep another and then you shoot one episode for television. So there's very little time for everything, from mistakes to breaks to everything, because it's like you are in between. As a production designer, I'm the only person and costume designer and who are like truly in the middle between two episodes. Everyone else gets a little bit of break because they just have a bigger crew and they operate differently. It's their jobs are a little different.
Yeah. So how far in advance of shooting a particular episode would you start to do prep for that episode? I imagine that you can't just get a location overnight, right? So how far in advance are you really working on an episode?
We if we have enough information, we start working in advance from the beginning, because we can start looking for stuff which we know we have to have for, because regardless where the script will go, because it's a key storytelling element. So we know that when Dana started her company, this will not go anywhere. So we could start this looking for the episode could go different directions, but that particular location. So those elements we start looking super early. But the sharing with the other director or the upcoming director, all the documents we started day one of shooting current episode. So there's never like a day we call day zero when it's like one episode finished shooting and another didn't start. We just don't have to. We just no one ever. I only work once on a job like when we had this and they built it because of an actor and it worked. But normally it's almost impossible. It's so expensive to keep people up. So it's like a 14 days, I guess. We have 14 days to prep, episode prep, build what's missing, talk to all the departments, all the parts they need to prep. That's why we're trying to do ahead as much as possible.
I mean, that seems like a very fast turnaround for 14 days, right? Oh, wow. So you had mentioned a bit about the colors of not only the episodes but also for the characters. Now, There's been some speculation online about like some of the color choices used for specific characters. Like there's somebody who did a whole article about the use of red, green, and blue to signify Donna, Gordon, and Joe. And I'm really curious if there's any truth to that. But it sounds like you had color schemes that aligned with something. So what was some of the symbolism that you were working with for season 4?
Well, for season 4, mainly it was 90s. We had to make sure that they went to a new decade. It's like 80s is over, 80s, this is what was 80s. Now we are a whole new computer game and it's going super fast. And 90s, and the challenge was it that if you do deep into a history project, people can understand visually if it's right or wrong, but they can't be sure because they weren't there. This is my, but 90s, so many people lived through 90s that we literally had to be right on all the occasion, like furniture, wallpapers, color. So we used a lot of, I did a color palette throughout the entire season, which was like looking at 90s architecture, museums, art, when plywood essentially was like, wow, we can build furniture out of plywood and they cool and hip. Or that the dusty rose was like one of those colors combined with gold. And then I was like, oh my God, then we can do this for Donna's house when she like lives in this sort of mid-modern little house. So in my case, I did mostly a color palette for entire show, and then we sort of allocated per character. So when Gordon lives in like sort of a Spanish house where he has this Blue Man group coming for a birthday, we just kept it all in yellows and sort of very like sort of a happy place, and then end up being less happy in the end. But it's sort of like not to get it, also not to give away that the things might not go as we plan in a story, right? So color can be, color and light can sort of give away too much. So I was trying to be sort of not neutral, but a little bit on the line that it's like, let's just show 90s in our at the best. And then we go for that.
Did you have a color palette for Joe or Cam?
Joe, yes. Joe lived in his apartment and it was very masculine. So we sort of removed he had a little bit of the Asian take on his apartment. So there was a little bit of red and black, and he had a very modern furniture. So we also got like when you as a designer, we have to look into their past. We have to look a little bit into the future, where they come from, to create their apartments or interiors and environments that they belong. Like Cam live in a camper. We got this camper in the middle of, I didn't even know where, like I know it wasn't in Atlanta. And the camper came in very different state than it was sold to us on the picture. And then we sort of revamped it. We started over and we gave her that look because she was that sort of wild card a little bit. So we were like, yeah, this is a great place for you to live. And then in this way, if the production design is not too aggressive or too wild, it helps character to live in and sort of shine instead of overpower. And that's what we did. So I do gonna read that article about red, black, and green.
I'll have to send that your way because I'd be curious. I mean, also like the characters change quite a lot over 4 seasons. So
maybe that has started at the beginning. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's tricky too if you're trying to figure out, like you were saying, you have to look at like the history, for example, of a character like Joe, who in the beginning it's like, who is this man? So it's interesting that you have to make those decisions. Well, I do have a lot of like more specific questions about some of the characters and scenes, but I know that you brought some visual aids that I know we're going to be really excited to see. So I'd love if you'd put those on the screen and talk us through what you prepared and what you wanted us to know about the work that you did on this show.
Let me see. I just gonna okay. I will share my screen.
Mhm.
And so we can do a Gordon's House. We can do Net Pacific, which was their new company. When I joined, they started brand new company, and that was their first look, where we took over like a warehouse, and they just went wild. So this is the presentation I have. We did a little bit of a 3D rendering just to show, what it's used to be. I think that was, and then essentially 3D then we created 3D model and organized more. And then, so this was in past,
Yep,
right? This
that's
is Mutiny Warehouse. This is for previous designer, I think Chris Brown, right?
yeah, that
Design.
space was so wild with that skylight.
So that space, when I joined, completely got transformed. We got a lot of money, and the 90s hit. So when we presented to a studio, we presented like, this is what you had for 3 years, because the 80s were booming. Now in 90s. So, and I loved looking at the previous designers' work, because we needed to create. I needed to be in sync and create the same world as they did. So I said it was great. And then so we did the 3D model of how we can reorganize and have a sort of a little bit new take on it, and refresh, and sort of give them a little bit opportunity to use the same architecture, but more organized, and they just in a sort of in a peak of their game. So we did a lot of 3D renderings just to sell the story. And then this is a little bit of our research, like you could see. So it's a blacks of colors and a lot of wood and a lot of blacks. It's sort of the like a very accessible modernism here. And this was one of the research. We love those cables. We just love them. It's like the connecting to, like, there is a gut out there, and we can be connected. And they're also like, where people start bringing a greenery inside in very different way than used to. I was like, let's do it. Let's try to give them that sort of new look, which is more airy and sort of more on a lighter color. And that was Gordon, which I love that reference, which he's just burying his territory. But you can tell that it's like the color palette repeats on images, because we just sort of constantly were looking for. I was constantly looking for, like, what are the combination? If it's a wood and glass, and what else? If there's a black of color, how we can make this contemporary but soft and inviting. So and you can tell that all the photos are from the library. I took it with my camera, downloaded, then cropped it in Photoshop. So- and then organized it. Here, for example, we're showing everyone how we're gonna connect staircase and balustrade with like those little, back then, very new way of doing an railing. This was also really interesting, how you would do partitions, and what would happen with what sort of that take on blinds we can apply to, by not using blinds, but just the lines itself. It was so fun. And we did a lot of those partitions, and that helped us to sort of also create like a little private areas, cubicles, but not so solid. And I think we had a lot of fun. But that's the research what I've been talking about. And this research, for example, the digital art, we created a mural on one of the walls, and I felt like, let's continue with the lines, the idea, and we would combine a couple images, and we sort of would alternate. And it took us like many takes to figure out how to do it, but I think it worked. It looked really, I felt it looked really nice.
Mhm.
So, so that was one. And then and here was oh, and here is like the AGG, and that was their bigger company where Dana worked. And so this is location. So we found this location, which was like abandoned former maybe insurance building.
Oh, wow.
And
What an amazing space this is in the show. The way the
beautiful.
light comes in. in so many of the
Oh,
scenes.
we loved it. It was situated in a great place. It had a parking lot, so we could also show, like, if you know, we could give people also an outside if it needed. And so that was a lobby, and it was all existing. And I was like, oh my God, is it literally 90s? They like made for us, and they left. So this is all we are. This is how you can see like location worked. And then we went upstairs, and this is what we got. We
Mhm.
got this empty space, and we loved it because we had a cubicles along the glass, so every other people, you know, lower level employees could have their offices, but higher than the cubicle. And we had also a lot of you know, like kitchen and kitchenettes, like regular office. I'm sure they were using. And we transited to the location, and we transformed this giant floor into our set.
Wow.
And everything what you see, what is not white out, it's built. So we
Wow.
did inside the location, but the architecture was so perfect for us that the job was almost like halfway done. And so you can see like the kitchen, we used the kitchen, but like we built Dana's office in a corner, which didn't exist. There was his assistant, Tanya. There was a conference room, which is like right in the middle. And it was great. Like finding location and like retrofitting your world into it is so fascinating. And this is our model. So we did a lot of like, we installed a lot of cubicles. We made it cleaner and very sleek. And I was looking at this. I was like, I think we're missing something. We're missing that element of art, that element of art and architecture combined. So we designed those curved fins, which were everywhere in a walls when
Mhm.
you were going past by. We there was sort of addition, like a very time consuming. We had an assistant art director figure out the angles for weeks, but I was like, it's worth it. It's gonna make this place very different than just average, you know, like office cubicle, because furniture gives a lot and makes a space very cozy or whatever you need. But I think the architecture, without the architecture, is much harder to have like a cohesive look. And so you can tell we just did that sort of centerpiece, and it just give us that sort of like she's in such a high place and she's like in a great place. And that was a little bit of the research, like now you see where we could have like a little bit relaxed, and that was just one of the research of her. And also like refractions were important to me, so you can have a little bit of just sort of that gloss, you know, the sort of gloss when you go to the slightly higher level. And this partition, which we have on much smaller scale in the other place, which is because it's more like, you know, computer just gigs together, we turn into another level because we gave those curves a little bit more feminine and touch
Mhm.
into a space. You can see how the wood, and this is still research, how we sort of play with the wood. So that was it. And then I think we have a little bit of Dana's house. We'll see Dana's house. That was a location we used, and it was just like beautiful.
Oh,
This
that door.
These guys that just built this house and were willing to share with us. There was a pool outside, and we needed, and believe it or not, we still had to like build and compose some stuff to it to just make sure it works. And I think in the end, we didn't use this house. I and we did, because there's the early research. We didn't use this house. We found identical house, like by the same architect, I think, a little bit down the road, and then it just worked out. There's something I remember something went wrong. We don't know. Sometimes with location, you never know. But this is again like that was her world. We gave her a little bit of like bold pattern, but at the same time like dusty, like a muted yellow and dusty rose, and like we gave her like you know, new life. She has a new job, she's a powerful woman, and I wanted her to like thrive in this. And the Gordon house, this house we use for Gordon house, there's a Blumen group all the way back playing some episodes. That's his That's his research. And I love this house. This house was so warm and it was like so Gordon that like when we saw this location and that backyard, I was like, oh gosh.
That's
It's
such an
like,
interesting house now that we're seeing these pictures.
right? They're
There,
very
there's some
different.
angles that, we didn't necessarily see all these angles
No,
in the show.
exactly. You never know. And then
It's very
this
quirky.
very quirky, but Gordon was quirky,
Yeah.
right? And we loved him. Which I did. So that was a little bit of like a research and like what we would do, like leather sofas and more like a very different patterns. Very much into music and just but at the same time his backyard would have a lot of light and a lot of life, and we had a little party in our fourth episode, and you know, and there was those guys show up. And hopefully I didn't spoil too much, but this was so long ago that I can imagine that I was spilled the beans because it literally was how long? 10 years ago?
Yeah, about.
Yeah,
Yeah, almost.
about.
Oh my goodness.
So
I loved these visuals. This is so great to see, and to see how things evolved. Building off of what you just showed us, there's a location that I'm wondering about. There's a location that we just see one time. Well, I think we just see it one time in season 4, which is where they shoot off the rockets. It's a field. It's just like a grassy area.
mhm.
That seems like it would be a totally different process of trying to secure a location like that versus some of the other indoor spaces that you would have been looking at.
It was for sure.
What goes into finding the right space for something like that?
I think we knew, well, again, we knew about this for a long time that this will not go away, and this is our sort of like very key point. So our location manager uh really tried to find a space where we would be secluded, but not too far away, so crew will get in. The trees would be there, but not too close. There were so many obstacles because she would show us something and we're like, too close to the building because it's just right. There's so much there's just a safety issue. Like every production wants to make sure that we're safe, and that we couldn't be near buildings, but we couldn't be too far. So she found, I think, this horse farm or like horse range, and they said we're gonna remove all the horses, once I remember, to another side, and they gave us this giant meadow. And partially there, we also had the Cam's camper. She also lived there, so we could like combine those two locations. But that was fun. I'm like, we built these rackets for like for so long. It was a whole art department. It's like who can do it and who can do it better, and we designed it and it worked. I think it worked, and it was one of those moments. Is like that's why we in this business. It's just so much fun.
Yeah, there you were having the fun that the characters were having in the
Yes.
show.
Yes. And it's like you just have to be like, oh my God, gosh, do not rain this day because this racket will not go off. There's so many logistics and like elements come to make a decision about how you do things. And it's unfortunately, it's never one person. It's
Mhm.
always it's always it's always men, and it's never one situation. There's so many other components that they have to align for things to happen. But we had a great weather. Everyone made it. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And we did it. Yes.
You showed us all of the different mock-ups that you had done, and the 3D visuals for it ended up being called Calnect, that office, that warehouse
Amen.
office.
Yes.
Um, but then that same space, we are going to see it.
Kalnick or comic?
So then it ended up changing to Comet.
Yes.
In the same season, which we hadn't really seen that before. We had seen that space be like one company for an entire season each time. So now, it starts as Calnect and then it becomes Comet, which had those two workspaces were populated by very, like, the Calnect was more sort of like older men and older women who were working there. Comet felt like a very young, vibrant
Very
space.
hip.
they both felt like vibrant spaces, but yeah,
Yeah.
you're right, like more of a hip feel.
Yeah.
So when you're working on that as a production designer, what do you do to make the changes that you need within that one space to represent different companies?
So lucky enough, we knew about that when we were designing the space. And because I took over the space from previous seasons, and we sort of made a pact that those pillars, the walls, the windows, this is our world, and we can only change between the world. When I designed the Comet was the last one, the the very first one, right? Which I can't blanking on the name. We did it. We did those modular desk and sort of. And when we were doing 3D renderings, I was like, what's gonna happen later? Let's see what's gonna happen later. And this is where technology is really helpful, because I used to do like a physical models and like move furniture and like show directors how to do it. And now we could remove few things and sort of make more like grander gestures just in a 3D model, to be like, what if we design this space this way and later in a season we end up here? And of course it's not written in stone, but at least it's enough to something to look forward to it and understand that maybe, oh yeah, we thought about this, but let's keep working on it because we have to finance it. And that's what we did. And we sort of got a little bit more like lively, and we started like a little bit stiff, but still, a lot of colors. And but then it's like when it moves, it just had so much life towards the end. And then the lights just went off.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Right. So then it's like the third act was like it's an empty space, which
absolutely. So I'm curious how production design comes into play when you're trying to show like the development of relationships, if at all. So like we get Cam and Joe, who they just get together at the beginning of season 4 after just a long time of not being together in various forms. And then they're a couple, but they each have their own separate living space. Joe's got his apartment, Cam gets her Airstream. And as the season progresses, they're sort of becoming more individualized as people within being this couple. And you can sort of see that they're kind of growing almost apart. Did the spaces change? How did you reflect, if at all, what was happening in their relationship within the spaces themselves?
Our spaces always reflect when the characters changes their journey and they go through hardship or just sort of the other direction. The space usually changes with the character. Joe's apartment was, I remember, got a little bit sort of out of control, messy. Well, Cam's moved in and got really messy. So, but it's just, and it's not just us. It's a little bit like also talking with wardrobe and her makeup and like hearing their ideas. If Cam was sort of a little bit on disarray in her looks, then we made her Airstream inside a little bit more like, oh, really hit the low part. And it's sort of like, and then you present this to your showrunners and director and you ask, how far would you like to go? Because as a designers, we propose and we can say, I can go as far as this, or I can go as little as this. I think it should be here, let's say. And they just look at their story and look arc. They are the creators of the whole situation, and they're like, you know what? How about we not gonna push her that far off, and we're gonna keep her still a little bit intact, but just give her a little bit of the hot mess or for Joe. So definitely the spaces travel with the sort of emotional journey of the characters always, at least the way how I would like to design, because I think it reflects on who we are and how he behave and where we are in that moment. So for sure.
In terms of the emotional journey of the characters, Donna is one that really is interesting to me because she starts off she's so in pain, but it's coming out as just like ruthlessness and anger. And she softens quite a lot by the end of this season. What are some of the things that you might have done to show us where she was in that journey?
Oh, she moved, yes, she moved to the house by herself, first of all, right? So that's what was the big change. And I think her journey was, she did soften, but I think her journey was more, from what I remember, that we gave her a power. She was a very independent woman in my season. So I don't know, if I actually don't know if her space, she did get, like, you're right, she got a little bit softer, or softened in the end, but I don't think it was enough for us to, because sometimes it's just not enough for us to like drastically change something in their environment to reflect on that. It's maybe more like, it's more about like the hair and makeup and acting of it all, when when your apartment is just like sort of already like very simple, and like design between the character. So
Hmm.
no, because it's a little bit easier to also follow a character when they go sort of off the rail, what's happening, and like how to present this. But when you get softer, like what, like, I'm sure we talked about this. I'm sure there was like million discussions, because and that's what we do. But I don't know if we made like a drastic, we might have changed a painting just to reflect her new mood, you know what I mean, or sculpture, or just do something with the garden, because sometimes that's what's is our, but I actually don't remember. It was
Yeah.
pandemic.
Well,
And
I'm
sorry
also
about that.
interested in Joe because Joe starts off the season and he's been depressed for a long time. Mental health wise, he's not in a good place. I would say by the end of the season, at the end of the series, feels like he's found more of an inner peace and more of an acceptance. When you're going through like a mental health journey for a character
Mhm.
like that, what are some of the things that you can do to show maybe the bad place that he's in or to show when he's coming out of that?
Oh, I I think I have to remember, I have to see, I actually don't remember if he stayed in this apartment. Um, because I didn't, I actually, yeah, I can, I can
Yeah.
tell you. I can tell you only because I would have to, for it's so specific, and the question is brilliant, but I think it's a more, I would have to rewatch, almost I would have to like rewatch my own work
Yeah.
to go back there and be like, I see, this is where we sort of started, it started changing. From what I can tell you, we did a lot of changes between the company, the way company look, and how their personal spaces look,
Right.
like their desks, their little offices, how they spend their way more time in our story than their homes, and that maybe their life sort of didn't pan out as they should or not should, it's this is was their journey. Then I think we did a little bit more of changing stuff between their areas in the comet itself.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think it was just more, it was just sort of, it was just more easier for us to show the change, because you have, this is, we know this is their love of their life, this is their work, and they really trying, and this is they spend their hours and nights, and I think we tried that, but
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. um Gordon,
yeah.
uh I mean, the big thing of season 4 is that Gordon passes away.
Yes.
We can see a lot of hints from different departments on this show. There's a lot of, they play with light a lot, they play with
Yes, we
the
did.
song a lot.
Mhm.
In your department, were there any hints that you remember dropping for the audience? Nothing was really like hitting us over the head, but if you watch it back, you often spot things.
Mhm.
Is there anything that we maybe should look out for related to Gordon's illness progression slash death.
I'm sure there was. I'm sure we did a lot of communities, but I can't recall anything to guide people in a wrong direction or right direction.
Mhm.
Gordon was that house was so dark to begin with. It was so interesting because as you could tell, it was so yellow outside and like so happy. And it's like he kind of is happy guy. And then you would walk inside and it's like dark wood elements and everything was just very sort of heavy. And I think it was just one of those places where it's almost like was, I think, it looked like a little bit man cave, but it wasn't, it was his home for families. So I think we can, I actually can, I can be for sure that we start dropping hint. Again, I think it's very tricky to with mental health issue or it's with Gordon passing away that um like to be careful that props will bring that sort of hint. I think it's a little bit different, I think, with like your appearance and your hair and makeup and the way how you behave as an actor, but like not to drop because then it's almost like you guiding audience into like what I mean? Like you guiding audience into. So that's why I think I don't remember because I think we didn't do that much in terms of like making sure that there is like an element show up. It's more like the house starts clean and there's a little disarray and then it's like sort of like if your life is not together, your house is not together. So that's probably more the journey we took than bringing specific element and sort of because then you when you think about this how these elements show up there like we always have to think about the good continuity. Someone brought it there, he bought it there, where he would buy it. There's so many IR always is like where did it came from and why would it be here. So I think it's just we probably were walking a very fine line to make sure that there is no distractions because we want to keep eyes on the character. And I think we should like, and I think it's like across all the characters that yes, we did make changes and the journeys in a journey between the their living group, living areas, but it wasn't more like, oh, I would bring an element,
Mhm.
just show this, because that would be like, look
Be
at the
so
left.
on the nose. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we did that fine, like sort of very fine line and making sure that the character itself is supported in the journey we're going, but not like, oh, right. It's like sort of
Yeah. You
that.
don't want to
That's why I'm like, I
telegraph
don't
it for the
remember because I
audience.
think we just didn't do it. We just left the space for other departments, like lighting, like how the camera moves, right? To sort of
Yeah.
help in a scene, help that scene
Yeah.
usually, which I think it's always sort of like that um, more subtle and sort of more delicate way of telling that it's not going right direction.
Mhm. I
Definitely.
have one more question about an episode and the series finale. Um, there are little moments where I feel like we're getting echoes of the pilot in different aspects in the dialogue, just
Uh-huh.
things like that. How much research did you go back and do research on the pilot for this? Were there elements that you were trying to bring in? We do see
I
some new spaces like Joe's new office, but how much are we supposed to be getting like echoes of the pilot in that final episode?
I think we did talk a little bit about like making a full circle and sort of give the closure because they knew it's not like we did a fourth season and everyone is like, oh, maybe we gotta pick up for four. Like when I took this job, everyone knew the four seasons would be that. So I'm sure there was sort of like that, there's always like that satisfaction. Like if we make a full circle, we just close the series. I did watch season one before I started, and then season two or three, and then I went back when we were towards the end because I felt like when I was like I think I need to know more. And I said like there's so much to absorb that even if you watch twice you can keep up. So this is the moment when I was grateful for everyone who worked on season one, two, and three. in my crew, from my crew, because they literally could guide me, and they would be like, Joe was this in the first episode. Maybe we can give him a little bit of that here too. So this is where you benefit from the situation, right?
You might have answered this much earlier, but you've worked on so many TV shows and movies now. For you, when you think back to *Halt and Catch Fire*, what jumps out to you? What distinguishes this show from anything else that you've worked on? What was different about this particular one?
Writing, like Chris's writing. They did a phenomenal job, like just creating the show. And also like just the company itself. They put together an excellent company, from like actors who were cast, the people who worked on it. Like it was such a great group. And I think that's something which is always, it's what stayed with me. So when Chris had this show, I was like, oh, I have to get on the show. I have to get back with Chris, one of the Chris's, because there are two Chris's, right? Chris Rogers and Chris Cantle. So I'm working with Chris Cantle. But it's very it was very also rewarding to work on a period piece I lived when I was a young person. Something what I could, oh, you totally had this. We totally had a phone like this. It was so rewarding. It was so much fun to be like, that totally was my first computer. But also it was also a time where because I lived through it, it was slightly easier for me to recognize like bad knockoffs, or like maybe it's a period, maybe it's a period. It was like so clear it wasn't a period. It was so that was like, I love that, because sometimes I was like, I can't believe this. I'm like, of course that we researched between the staplers to tape dispensers to, of course, mouses. Everything was in an office was literally period. And I was like, this is the show where people will keep watching, and they will find where we didn't have a right prop, and we didn't. We always had a right prop and right set dressing. So there's a lot of commands, but the writing is just exquisite on the show. And I think the way how they were brave and take this sort of arc for each character, and not be sort of like, oh, sure, like, sure, this is gonna happen. I'm like, no, we didn't know. We actually didn't know till the very end.
Yeah.
Right? Right? Don't you
Yeah.
think like there was a little bit of hint, but it was so like, and I just loved it. I loved working on it. So I'm very excited
Absolutely.
that you're doing this 10 years
Oh,
later. And I was like, this is so unbelievable.
this has been such a blast to be able to talk with people about the hard work that they put into this show. Since that show, is there any work that you've done since then recently that you want to make sure that we know about, that we've seen?
Yes, I think, well, this is the AMC project, which I'm doing with Chris, is going to be a really cool project called Devil in Silver. But I just came back from Vancouver and did the movie. I don't know if you do movies, but movie with Andrew Staton, who is director of Finding Nemo and Finding Dory and all Toy Stories. And we did an beautiful project in Vancouver about life, and like life and generations and future and past. And it was one of those companies, a little bit like with Halt and Catch Fire, that I think I'm gonna look back and be like, that was a great project. We're still in editing, everything's taking a little longer, and it's gonna come out in next year. But it's beautiful, and it's sort of like, I hope it's gonna give people a little bit more of like moment of reflection, that what life is,
Yeah.
who we are. So that's always a refreshing moment when you work on projects like this too.
Oh, this is so great to hear. So that everybody who's listening and watching this needs to check those projects out. And, thank you so much for taking
Yes.
time to talk about this show and all the work that you did on it. I mean, what an incredible visual palette you created for us in season 4 to really feast on. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
And to everybody who's watching this, please go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Bye, everybody.
Bye.